Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
In 6 amazing days in June of 1967, the Jewish world was literally transformed. The Six-Day War of 1967 not only changed the map of the Middle East, it radically and marvelously changed Jewish self-identity in Israel and regarding Israel. How Israelis felt about themselves, how the Jewish world felt about the state of Israel, how American Jews felt about themselves, how world Jewry felt about itself. And the dormant, moribund Jewish community in the former Soviet Union suddenly arose from a valley of dry bones to help tear down the mighty Iron Curtain and to ultimately infuse the state of Israel with more than 1 million new Olim who have renewed sense of their own Jewish core and who've made an invaluable contribution to the Jewish state of Israel. All this because of 6 miraculous days in June of 1967. I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to a very special week of programming here on JBS as we celebrate the Israeli victory in the Six-Day War of 1967, when the state of Israel shocked the entire world by defeating the combined Arab armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, with help from Iraq and the Pakistani Air Force. More than 250,000 men were assembled on the borders of Israel under the leadership of Egyptian President Abdel Nasser, who vowed to annihilate the Jewish state. The Jewish world trembled in fear of Israel's existential existence. Would the Arab world actually destroy the Jewish state only 20 years after its creation? And then, those of us who can remember well know that Israel launched a preemptive airstrike on Monday morning, June 5th, that virtually decimated the entire Egyptian Air Force as it sat on the ground. And within 6 days, Syria had been pushed off the Golan Heights, which the Syrians had used repeatedly, mercilessly, to shell Israeli communities in the Hula Valley. Egypt was pushed out of the Sinai, and the Straits of Tiran were once again free for use as an Israeli trade route. And Jordan had not only been pushed off the West Bank, which it had seized and occupied, even annexed, without international sanction. The Israeli army also pushed Jordan off the West Bank and liberated the old city of Jerusalem with the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. And throughout the Jewish world, the words rang out, Har Habayit Biadenu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. All in 6 short days. The self-image of the Jew went from old defenseless Jew to the young, strong, gorgeous Jewish Israeli. And in many, many ways, not only the state of Israel, but the entire Jewish people worldwide came of age. And Jewish life has never been the same. And so now we celebrate the 50th anniversary of that momentous, miraculous 6 days in June. And to help us with our celebration, I'm joined by a dear friend for whom I have unbounding regard, for being one of the true champions of Jewish life today, being one of the most articulate voices representing and defending the Jewish state against those who seek to undermine its legitimacy and existence even today. And a man who was there in June of 1967 and his own way participating in the Six-Day War. Danny Ayalon, Israel's former ambassador to the United States, a former deputy foreign minister of the State of Israel, and the man who helps produce a marvelous video series seen here on JBS and all over the world online, The Truth About Israel. And how wonderful it is to have you back in this chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The honor and pleasure is mine,
love you
Mark.
so
Always
much.
good to be here.
So you heard me describe the momentous days of June 5 through 10 of 1967. Did I get it basically right?
Yes, yes. And I think you beautifully articulated also the threat that we all felt. And I still remember there were 3 weeks leading.
Yes, I
into
want to
this
start
war.
there with you. First of all, how old are you? How old are you in 67?
I was 12 years old, 6th grade. And
Sixth grade.
Yes. And
But you remember this vividly,
oh,
yes?
very vividly, very vividly.
I want you to tell our audience because many of us were there, and many of those watching you right now were not there.
Yeah.
We're not even born yet. I want you to describe, try to describe again, the fear that gripped you as a 12-year-old and gripped the nation at the time.
Well, it was really a roller coaster of emotions because the tension started about May 15th or so, about 3 weeks before, just after our Independence Day celebrations. You know, we celebrated our 67 from 48. We celebrated our 19th birthday. It was a great, glorious days. We had a parade in Jerusalem, and really it was a very, very good sense of, you know, of success, of self-confidence, of self-identity. You know, really building our land back.
And where are you?
I'm in Tel Aviv,
You're in
downtown Tel Aviv.
Okay.
Also, what really helped our self-confidence was that just a few days before that, there was a dogfight between Israeli planes and Syrian planes. The Syrians who had the Golan, you know, they kept bombing our communities, the kibbutzim, the moshavim down there, ruthlessly. And Israel would always either retaliate or prevent, and they would send their jets. Israeli fighters were great, as they are today. And I think they shot down like 6. And then all
They were MiGs, weren't they?
MiGs, right, the Russian
Made
MiGs.
by the Russians, right? Soviet Union. And
Correct.
Israel had?
We had the Mirages.
From?
France.
From France.
Yes. This
Not
was,
from America.
No, this was our first line combat air jets. And then we get the news that Nasser is moving his divisions, thousands of tanks, into the Sinai, which was a material breach of the 56 agreement. If you recall, in 56, we also, in a way, a war of self-defense, we captured most of the Sinai. We had to go back under enormous pressure from then President Eisenhower. It was 1956. But at least we got something in paper which said that the Sinai will be demilitarized. Egyptian forces cannot station there. The UN created a peacekeeping force. It was the first peacekeeping force since UN was established following World War II. And they were deployed on our borders, and they were supposed to keep us safe. And then come 67, only 10, 11 years after this agreement, Nasser moves into the Sinai against the agreement. He tells the UN, that UN Secretary General at the time was a guy from Burma. His name was U Tent. So he told U Tent, listen, I'm coming in, you get out of there. And what did U Tent do? He got out of there. So here we are, we felt, again, defenseless against these divisions of tanks. And not only that, Nasser marshaled Jordan and Egypt and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Morocco and Algeria behind him. And there was a ring around us, you know, Jordanian, Syrians, Egyptians, and we had only the sea. You know, we had our backs only to the sea. And every day we heard more divisions are coming, more divisions are coming. And then he decided, Nasser, to close the straits of Tiran, Sharm el-Sheikh. So that was kind of snuffing out all lifelines that Israel had. So we couldn't get any supplies, from this Suez
Trade
Canal.
route, right.
Yes, right. And we started with the diplomatic campaign. At that time, Abba Eban was our foreign minister. And Mark, you remember him, the legendary foreign minister.
Legendary.
Was also ambassador to the UN, ambassador to the U.S., really one of a kind. And he started going from capital to capital, London, Paris, Berlin, Washington, of course, trying to impress upon them that not only it was a material breach against the agreement, that they have to do something to bring back the status quo ante, as we say.
And once more, what had Eisenhower and basically the Western coalition promised Israel they would do if Egypt ever did cross into the Sinai?
Very good point. They said not only that they will never allow it, but in case that Egypt would close the Suez Canal again for us and try to blockade and move forward, they will even forcefully push the Egyptians back. That they would send an armada, would
They
take
were going
a
to come
strike group.
militarily to your defense.
Absolutely.
So Abba Eban is going from capital to capital, only asking that what had been promised Israel
Right.
would be fulfilled.
Right. So just make good on your words.
And what happened?
They all started, hesitating, looking the other way, saying, well, let's see, let's try. We have to do it peacefully. You better not strike or anything, because then you're alone. And then there was a momentous meeting that Abba Eban had in State Department. Johnson was the president, and he came with a copy of a letter from the United States, from Eisenhower time, that gave this pledge: we will come to your help, even militarily. So he comes and says, listen, you promised. This is why we had given all this land that we had. What was his reply? And I think it's in his book as well. He said, yes, but we do not find the original. It's not in our archives. So, in a way, we are not bound by it. And then they said, well, we're going to send an international armada to open the straits. Nothing has happened. And again, we were warned, don't make any movement. Don't strike. Wait, we will come to your help.
Who's making that threat, or that telling you do not strike yourself?
First and foremost, the Europeans. French President de Gaulle, who until then, Mark, and you mentioned it, the Mirage, most of our equipment was from France. He says, if you strike for our self-defense, I will have an embargo on you. You will not see a single bullet from France. Not only then, he was not very, very reassuring us.
To the contrary.
To the contrary. So, in any case, on the one hand, we see the tanks coming closer and closer to our borders. All our supply lines are closed. And here, state after state, country after country, telling us, well, we cannot do much for you, and certainly we cannot come to your help. But at the same time, they tell us not to do anything for self-defense. They will try to negotiate something. And there was no appetite in the Israeli government to do much.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, they really...
That's a very important point.
Yes. Our government, led by Levi Eshkol, who replaced Ben-Gurion, the legendary, the founding father of the modern state of Israel, also tried to do everything he could not to have any military campaign. Contrary to the sentiments that the staff, the joint or the
general
general
said to him,
staff, they told him, listen, if we wait any longer and we allowed the Egyptians to dig in further in the Sinai, every day will cost us thousands of more casualties. And they were quite confident that they can do it. Rabin was the chief of staff. Ezra Weizmann was like a general of operations. Moti Hod was replacing him as the Air Force commander.
And Dayan was where?
Dayan was still a citizen who was out of politics at the time.
Moshe Dayan.
Moshe Dayan
Legendary Moshe
yes,
Dayan.
was out of politics because in '63, Ben Gurion resigned from the prime ministership, and he was very upset with his own party, Mapai, later becoming Labor. He formed his own party, which was called Rafi, and Dayan joined him. Dayan and Shimon Peres joined him. And elections in '65, they won only 10 seats. They were out of the government, and Dayan was a member of Knesset and basically no influence and no position of decision making. And there was a real outcry. I still remember. I remember at my home. I remember at school, in the streets. People were really afraid of another Holocaust. Only 22 years after the most horrific time in history, certainly for the Jewish people.
That was the fear.
That was the fear.
It was the existential end
Absolutely.
of the state of Israel.
Absolutely.
And people have to understand that. That's the extent to which it seemed that Israel was in horrible risk. Yes?
Yes, and this was only 19 years after our reestablishment.
Yes.
And in 1947, 48, if you recall, and you know it, Mark, we talked about it, we were 600,000 Jews in the land, surrounded by 100 million hostile Arabs. We survived the War of Independence, and we thrived since then. In 1967, again, once we thought, okay, no more war after this 56, we were at the time maybe around 2 million Jews in the country, surrounded by 150, almost 200 million. So in a way, and they were much, they outgunned us, outnumbered us in a very, very decisive way. And the fact that we felt alone, no other country in the world would come to our help. Not from a moral point of view, political point of view, certainly not from economic or military point of view. We were all by ourselves and warned by all these countries, friends of ours,
Don't take a move.
Don't take a move. And we see, you see that like the threats coming more and more. One thing I would say that with all this fear and existential threats, one thing we knew, and I think this is part of the great, I would say the great success of the Jewish people to overcome trials and tribulations, with, anyone who tried to decimate us, they were going this way, and we always survived. So we knew we have to take our destiny in our own hand.
Your parents' names?
Rafi and Lili Alea Shalom. Rafi, my father, is 88. My mother, she passed away unfortunately about 18 years ago. Both fought in the War of Independence. Yeah.
Wow.
My mother was even injured in Jerusalem.
Do you remember at all what they were saying or feeling? You're their son. What are your parents communicating to you in those days? Can you remember?
Well, first of all, yeah, I remember. Not only I was 12 years old, I had a sister who was younger than me. She was like 5 years old, and they have to kind of think about the future of their children. My father didn't stay long because he was called for his reserve duty. So we stayed with my mother, and then we followed the rules of the civil defense. And the threat was that, of course, that enemy jets would come and bomb Tel Aviv, like they did in 1948. So the first thing we did, I remember, we had to buy masking tapes and just tape all the windows and all glasses in case of bombing, that they would not just shatter. And then we were told, and we did fill in sandbags just to protect the entrances everywhere we could. And the most morbid thing I remember is that in the parks of Tel Aviv, we dug a lot of holes for mass graves. The expectation was tens of thousands of casualties in the war.
Did your mother express fear to you?
No. I know that she had a lot of concerns.
Of course.
But always, she said, well, don't worry, things will be fine. We will help ourselves. And we didn't sit idle. Again, of course, we bought a lot of food and conserves, to keep in the house. I remember we kept a lot of water. And again, we defended whatever we could with the masking tapes and with the sandbags and everything we could.
But I still want to know, did you sleep at night? What kind of thoughts go through a 12-year-old's mind in this situation?
I remember most vividly the real fear I had was, you heard Nasser talking about pushing the Jews to the sea, destroying the state of Israel. So I was thinking, wow, they're going to come, destroy our homes, and push us literally into the sea. Yes. And I remember as a 12-year-old, what I did at that time, I had, I kept under my bed a bathing suit. I was thinking, if he's going to push us into the sea, at least I can do something. And I also had some goggles, and I kept it in case I had to swim. At that time, I thought, well, I can swim over to Europe or something like that. But I remember that was my, 12-year-old.
Very real. You're filling sandbags?
Yes, I was filling sandbags. I was, everyone who can fight was drafted or was mobilized, reserve duties and of course the regular army. Everyone who was like 17 and younger, all the way down to 8-year-old kids were just mobilized in the back, either volunteering in hospitals, collecting and trying to create a better reservoir of blood, blood bank supplies, and again, diggings, sandbags, and everything we could. I also remember what we did was, of course, we had to have a darkening of the homes. So everything was covered.
It was a blackout at night.
It was a blackout, right. So we couldn't really turn much light, only in rooms where they were covered with blankets, and cars on the streets were also, their headlights were painted.
One last question in this area. As you look back on it, the extent to which you know, did you feel there was a sense of oneness throughout Israel? Israel is like every other place. There's all kinds of frictions and tensions and jealousies, and this group gets more and that group. Did this situation sort of obliterate all that nonsense? And did you feel everybody was together? Or in the midst of this, is there still, discord between groups in Israel?
Not at all, Mark. We felt like one. And at that time in '67, it's not like today. I think it was really very fresh after the aliyah of the Jews from the Arab countries who were put in really very bad conditions and all that. The friction, Ashkenazi and Sephardi, was still vivid at the time. In the 50s, we had some demonstrations, but at that moment, we felt like one. I remember that, if you need to go from one place to another, whether you're a soldier or not, all you had to do is just lift your hand. Everybody would stop and ask you, where would you like to go? I remember men and women taking a lot of foods, putting them, on stands. So soldiers who were on their way to the front could have something to drink or something to eat.
Yes, this is legendary.
It was, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In America during World War II, Japanese Americans were interred. Do you remember or do you know what was the attitude Israelis had towards Arab Israelis during those days?
I remember that we looked at them as equals.
You didn't say these are the people who want to push me in the sea?
No. No. Until 1966, there was a curfew. There was like a military administration over the Arab villages. But it was lifted in 1966, and the idea was to really integrate them as much as possible into the society. So when 67 came, this was already after this curfew, and at that time, I do not recall that the Israeli Arabs, as some of them are today, were very extreme. Today, unfortunately, and I think this is because of incitements from the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, and Hamas, we know there are some movements, the Islamic movements in Israel, which is very, very extreme. And because we are a democracy and you have freedom of speech, they talk very, very openly about the destruction of Israel. Members of Knesset, who are Arabs, talk about that. But at that time, it wasn't
It was
that
a
bad.
different world.
It was a different world.
Okay. Okay, we're getting closer now to the first days of June. You know what happened because you've now studied and you were in the halls of government. So you now step out of being a 12-year-old and now you're giving us the narrative. As we reach the first days of June, the end of May, beginning of June, what's going on?
Okay. So here, as we say, the military sees that they are losing an opportunity. I mean, we also, of course, mobilized, and the generals, Ariel Sharon, which was then a division commander in the south, Ezer Weizmann, as I mentioned, Rabin, a few others, really demanded from the government to give them the green light to start a strike, a preventive strike, in order to make sure that Israel survives and also to minimize the casualties. And again, Eshkol, the prime minister, and the government was not sure about it. They were afraid that, again, that if we start, the world will not come to our rescue or to our help, and then it may be catastrophe.
By the way, you just said the generals believed you could win.
Oh, absolutely.
And incidentally, we should say, and you can comment on this, there is something, and I use quotation marks, miraculous about what happened. That doesn't mean it was a literal miracle, because it is clear, the records show, that the generals of Israel thought in a week you could win this war. The people didn't know. I'm in New York at the time.
Right.
I'm scared to death for Israel. I'm a first-year rabbinic student, listening to the radio with my colleague students. We're all expecting, we're listening to Abba Eban, who is magnificent in the United Nations, but we're hearing Nasser at the same time, and it looks to us like the world doesn't care.
Yeah.
So we're scared in a different way than you are, but we're all in this together. What I said in the open was, this changes Jewish life around the world. When I say we come of age, Danny, the reality of life is that prior to 67, a very small percentage of American Jews had any feeling for Israel. That all changes in 6 days of June of 67. So I'm there watching, and I'm scared. What I've read in retrospect is the generals believed you could win. America, the generals of America, knew you could win if you struck first.
Right.
So it doesn't take the miracle away because it was so stunning, but it's not as if people who were professional didn't believe Israel could win. It's the rest of us who didn't know. Is that fair to you?
Absolutely. And I remember, Mark, also the lowest moment was just maybe a week before the war started, when Levi Eshkol, the prime minister, was giving a speech to the nation. At that time, we did not have television in Israel. It was in the radio. And for some reason, he couldn't read. His assistants replaced the pages at the last moment with some kind of scribbles that he couldn't read. So the sound was, the people who heard the speech, it sounded to them like he was stuttering.
Yes.
And
frightened.
And frightened. It wasn't really the case, but was the impression.
Impression given.
Yes, and after that, I think things were quickly coming into a head. Great pressure from the public, from the press, to appoint Moshe Dayan as the Minister of Defense, because at that time Eshkol was Prime Minister and Minister of Defense. 1st of June, Eshkol acquiesced. Dayan is appointed, and from day one, then he called the generals. He wanted to see the war game, the war plans, and from that time, the countdown started.
Okay. Is there anything you want to say about the days immediately preceding, or do we go right to this would be the 27th of ER, June 5th on the English calendar in the year 1967, and my recollection is it's 7:30 in the morning is when the strike, where the airplanes take off, heading very low along the Mediterranean Sea, some over the Red Sea heading for the Egyptian airfields. But is there anything that's happening the first 4 days of June that you want to tell us about?
Well, I can tell you, the moment the war started, it's a moment that I will never forget in my own lives. I was, as you mentioned, it was about 7:30, 7:45 in the morning. I was on my way, walking on my way to school. And then I hear the sirens. And I was about midway, and I was thinking, should I run to school? Also, we had a shelter at school, or do I go back to my home? I decided to go on and met my friends over there. We went into the shelter. And
what was your feeling then?
Well, the feeling was, I mean, when you hear the siren, it's quite scary.
It is scary.
It's very scary. It's very strong. You know, the idea is to scare you so you can run for shelter, for refuge. And then you're in, you don't know what's going on. Of course, we had some radios, and batteries. And
you were imagining something. Were you imagining Israel was winning? Were you imagining Nasser is now advancing, and the next thing you know, you're going to have to get into your bathing suit and goggles, and you're in the sea?
Well, what I imagined was that, a real prayer for the soldiers in the front, because we knew, we didn't know what was going on. But we said among ourselves, if they, God forbid, were overrun, we would use whatever we can to defend ourselves, and we will not go peacefully.
Oh, that's an extraordinary thing to hear.
Yeah.
And it really bespeaks something inside the Israeli spirit.
And Mark, you have to remember, it was less than 20 years after the Holocaust, after we knew how defenseless our people were. And we
you were not going to go down without a real fight.
Said, never again. Yeah.
Never again. Your father is in the reserves at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know where he was?
Yes, he was actually in the Negev. He was in an infantry.
Did you worry for your father?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, you're an analyst here. What's happening? What is Israel doing, and why is it successful?
Okay. I would say for a few reasons. The first one was that, we knew that we had no alternative but winning. We knew that justice is on our side. We knew that aggression, was not justified at all. And we also felt betrayed by the international community and, of course, by the Arabs who breached the agreement from 1956, which really added to, I would say, to some anger that we felt. And so that was a very strong point of morale. But then the military, I must say, they were quite ingenious, because from 56 on, they meticulously prepared for any eventuality. So what is called Operation Moked. Moked is focus operation. It took about 8 years to prepare for the preventive airstrike of the Air Force. So every plane would know exactly what route it was going to what airfield in Egypt.
Every plane.
Every plane. And not only once, but I think it was a record that every pilot had like 4, 5 sorties a day. So they would come back, they would rearm and go again and go again. So if at that time we had about 200 planes, but because of the reuse, it was like we had 800. And again, the intelligence also was very well
And
prepared.
what was their objective?
The objective was to destroy the Air Force. First and foremost the Egyptian, but also the Syrian and Jordanian, to catch them on the ground before they can even take off. And everything was planned around it. So there were a lot of intelligence operations, some ploy operations beforehand. The days before, there was a lot of chatter, as if we are just, the army is just, or the Air Force is just doing its morning routine. And the time was prepared for when the Egyptians, pilots, go after their morning alert, go to their masses to eat breakfast. And also the sun was in their eyes in case they would take off. So every little minute detail was very well planned. And indeed, they were caught by surprise. And most of their planes, like 400 planes, were destroyed on the ground. And not only that, but they prepared special bombs that would really also destroy the tarmac and the airstrips. So it would take them a long time to refill. And pretty much in one day, we neutralized the entire Air Force of Egypt, of the Syrians, and most of the Jordanians.
Yes. Everybody says in war, if you control the sky, you control the war. Mm-hmm. This did not mean the war was over, but Israel had taken a dramatic, successful step.
Right.
Can you talk at all about Jordan and the fact that Israel was saying to Jordan, stay out of it.
Right.
And Jordan, my understanding is, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, was sort of snookered into this war because they were told that the planes that were flying overhead were Egyptian planes. What's the story there?
Yeah, it is all true. You know that many years later, Israeli intelligence released the audios of the phone call between Nasser and King Hussein at the time, where Nasser is explaining to Hussein, we are winning the war.
Yes.
You have to join us, so otherwise you will not enjoy the spoils of this war, and we will always remember that, and Jordan will be, you know,
if
mud.
Jordan had not attacked, what was Israel's plan vis-a-vis Jordan?
Nothing.
Leave it alone.
Leave it alone.
Not touch the West Bank.
Not touch the West
Even the old city of Jerusalem.
Yes, yes.
And Jordan was told, don't come in.
Yes.
But
they did.
They did.
They did. Like, you know, an act of God. I don't know, something yes. beyond our control.
Yes.
From day one of the war, they started bombarding Jerusalem. And they began sniping, bombing, and in a relentless way.
So a front is opened, is heading into the West Bank. Also at that point, there's an attempt to liberate the old city,
yes,
correct?
Yes.
And the name Uzi Narkis is the name that is associated with the successful liberation of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us anything about that? And yes. By the way, we should begin with, these happen almost one after the other. But people who go to Israel often visit Ammunition Hill.
Right.
Tell us about Ammunition Hill.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Mark, General Narkis was the commanding officer of the Central Command, Central Front. Under him was Colonel Motagur, who was the brigade commander of the paratroops, brigade number 55, the 55th paratroops brigade. And he was the one that captured the Ammunition Hill.
Correct.
And also the Kotel. And they were the strict orders were, you know, we were talking about Jerusalem, we're talking about the holiest sites for us, for Christians, for Muslims, so we have to be very, very careful. And of course, they couldn't soften the targets, as usually in military operations they do, because we didn't want to damage any of the holy sites.
Yes, people should understand. That's extraordinary, right? Here you are in a fight for your life. And the word is, when we go into Jerusalem, it has to be street by street.
Yes, house to house.
We're not going to use anything that would destroy
Right.
the old city in terms of property and antiquities.
Right, right.
Okay. It's day 2. I think it's day 2 that the Israeli army is able to break into Jerusalem. Am I right?
The 7th, yeah, that was the 7th.
So it's the 3rd day.
Yeah.
Okay. And where are you on June 7th?
June 7th, there was no school.
Right.
We were all in a shelters. Not every home, every house had shelters. So we had a nearby kind of a public building. It was a bank, actually, which had public shelters. So all the neighbors were just sleeping there. I remember the kids had a great time. And then the news starting to come back from the fronts that the Egyptian Air Force is destroyed, the Syrian, and then we realized the war is over pretty much, and we have made it.
What a relief it must have been.
Oh, it was amazing.
Exhilarating?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Do you hear the announcement?
Oh.
Harrowing Biadenu?
Everybody here, because this was recorded, and it was just the radio
Played over and over.
And
it
over
was?
and over. Harrowing Biadenu by Motagur.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I get chills even just thinking of it.
Yeah.
And again, I assume exhilaration. Almost, again, disbelief. Because everybody expected something so dire.
Right, right,
Mhm.
right.
The war goes on another few days. And what I understand is that even with Jerusalem, the problem was the world right away understood once the Egyptian Air Force had been destroyed, Israel was going to win.
Right.
The world doesn't like Israel winning. And so there was a question, when would the United Nations and the United States impose
Right.
a ceasefire?
Right.
And my understanding is that one of the things that pushed Dayan to say, okay, go into Jerusalem, was that if it weren't done then, this ceasefire might come and you'd never get into Jerusalem.
Right.
Do I have it basically correct?
Yes. It was more even urgent in the north for the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights was really left for the end of the war, for day 5 and 6. And we realized already, the Soviets at the time, nobody really was rushing to our help. Nobody was feeling any urgency to convene the Security Council of the United Nations to warn the Egyptians and all that. But as soon as it was obvious that we are winning the war, again, the Soviets are convening the Security Council and they're all coming to take a resolution of a ceasefire and everything like that. We realized that we were playing again against time. And the fear was, actually the military, Moshe Dayan, and the government was willing to cease the fire on the 4th day. After we had Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and the Sinai, basically, we reached the Suez Canal. But there was a huge pressure from the northern towns and villages and kibbutzim, because they were also bombarded by the Syrians ceaselessly. They said, you cannot leave this situation where the Syrian army is overlooking all our houses, our nurseries, our fields and everything. And the Dado, which later became the chief of staff in the Yom Kippur War, General David Elazar, was the commanding officer of the northern command front, flew to Jerusalem to convince Dayan to also take the Golan Heights.
Wow. And then June 10th, a ceasefire is agreed to. And all of a sudden you don't have to worry anymore about that bathing suit and those goggles.
Right, right.
What did you feel then?
Oh, first thing, we went to the beach. Before then, we were scared to go to the beach because, we thought, because this was the route of the Egyptian in 48. They came from the west, from the, from the Mediterranean to attack. Everybody went to the beach. There were parties. There were prayers. If you recall Rabbi Goren, which was the chief IDF rabbi.
Yes.
He used the
blew
shofar. Blew the shofar.
At the Western Wall.
At the Western Wall.
And did you know about that? You're in Tel Aviv at the time.
Yeah. Oh, the photos and the recording went all over and played over and over.
The iconic picture of the 3 paratroopers in front of the Western Wall. Is that something of its time, or is that something we now see that was not an iconic picture in '67?
No, it was one of the iconic. There were 2, I would say, or 3 iconic pictures. First and foremost were the 3 paratroopers. The middle one without his helmet. By the way, he was my teacher in elementary school.
Are you kidding me? You knew him?
Of course.
Boy, I believe all 3 are living.
All 3 are living.
And you said there was another iconic picture.
The other one was of Lieutenant, at that time, Yossi Ben Hanan, armored brigade, an armored force tank commander, who jumped into the Suez Canal with a Egyptian Kalashnikov in his head.
Kalashnikov was made by the Russians.
Of course, over his head like that. And this was on the front page of
Life magazine.
Right.
One more picture. The picture of Moshe Dayan striding into the old city with Yitzhak Rabin on his left and Uzi Narkis on his right. For me, that also is an iconic picture. Was it of its time, or is that something you see later?
No, also of its time. They were just coming in through the Lions Gate, which was the gate where the paratroopers stormed through. And the story is, I don't know if it's true or not, that actually it was Moshe Dayan who wanted to make sure that this will be taken. And Moshe Dayan was very much aware of the power of the picture. And Levi Eshkol, the prime minister, wanted to join them. And Moshe Dayan tells Eshkol, it's too dangerous yet, do not come. So Moshe Dayan had the leading role in this iconic photo.
There's always politics, isn't there? It's just life.
Yeah.
That's
anyway,
just life.
Just a small story.
Yes.
Yeah.
But these are the images that we carry with us today. And it's interesting for me to hear you say, they were the images of your time as well. The picture of the Israeli in the Suez Canal, he's just lovely. You know, Michael Oren tells a story that his father had that picture of Life magazine. He comes down to breakfast, and his father's holding that picture of Life magazine, and his father kisses the picture. And Michael Oren says, I want to be that kid. And of course, Michael Oren, who for his bar mitzvah was reading transliterated English for the Haftarah, goes on to become fluent in Hebrew, an international scholar, ultimately an ambassador for Israel to the United States. And in many ways, he's inspired by a picture that inspires so much of us. I am a rabbinic student. I am totally changed. And I want to know the extent to which, A, you appreciate now, as a mature diplomat and one who has lived and seen so much, do you appreciate now the extent to which the Six-Day War not only won a victory that was essential, crucial, vital to Israel's being able to now reach, as we're sitting here, its 69th birthday, but do you understand that it changed world Jewry's perception of itself, and did it change Israeli perception? Were you different after seeing those kind of pictures?
Well, my heart was just filled with pride, and And I'm sure it changed me forever. And I know that also inspired me a few years later, when I was 18, 6 years later, of course, to be drafted to the military. And I was also seeking or thinking of a military career.
One more thing. The war is over. Jerusalem is now a united city. It is liberated. By the way, it's interesting to see the words that were used. The words used were liberation. Judea, Samaria was liberated. The West Bank was liberated. It wasn't called occupied. Levi Eshkol is the prime minister. People in the Knesset, in the cabinet, say, you know, we're suddenly about to be in control of X million Arabs. They were not called Palestinians at the time.
Right.
What do we want this for? And Levi Eshkol and the cabinet decide that they will make an offer to the Arab world. They make an offer to the Arab League, which most American Jews don't know about. Israel says to the Arab League in August of 1967, the war was in June, you can have all this land if it's over. If you make peace with us, we'll negotiate a border. We're going to keep Jerusalem, and we're going to keep the Golan Heights.
Yeah.
But the rest, we'll negotiate. We don't need, we like it, but we are ready to say, you have it, if you give us peace. The Arab League goes to Khartoum, the capital of the Sudan. They spend a week, the last week of August. On September 1, they issue their response to Levi Eshkol's offer. What is that response?
Well, until now, it's called the 3 no's of Khartoum. That means no to recognition of Israel, no to negotiation with Israel, and no to peace. And this was like a slap in the face, a return to reality, because there was really a great elation in Israel. I mean, we knew right away that, you know, Jerusalem would always be kept. You know, Jerusalem kept the Jewish people for 2,000 years of exile. Now it was our duty to keep Jerusalem. And of course, we found Jerusalem in a devastated position. You know that the Jordanian army, they desecrated the Jewish cemeteries. You know, they took this tombstones, making them, you know, urinal. It was just despicable. Of course, we couldn't even have any access. Jews could not even come to the Kotel. Of course, we opened it to all religions and freedom of all that. I think the first decision, the resolution of the Levi Eshkol government, which is a left, it's not a right wing, was Jerusalem is going to be incorporated, reunited, Israeli. This was the first decision. And then the offer was, you can get anything else for real peace. And of course, the answer was the no, no, no of Khartoum.
Tragically, in some way, the 3 no's has been operative to this day. And I'm always, you know, we've discussed this before, I'm always just amazed that people don't understand. If somebody says to you, I'm not negotiating with you, I'm not recognizing your right to exist, and I have no interest in making peace, to then say, you know, if Israel only did X, Y, or Z, if they only stopped building settlements, there may be issues with settlements, there may be all kinds of issues, but that's not why we don't have peace.
Absolutely not.
And again, what you've described and what we celebrate now, the 50th anniversary of, and we celebrate it every year, is really the beginning of something that I consider to be modern Jewish life. You heard me say, American Jewry comes of age. We're different, although there is still a large percentage of American Jews who don't get it, who still have never been to Israel, never once.
That's a shanda.
It is, if not a shame, it is, if not a shanda, it's a shame and a shanda. And there are those who all they want to do is be critical of Israel. There is a large, large percentage of American Jews who ever since 67, there were some before 67, after 67, devoted to the state of Israel and proud of the state of Israel. And we've been proud every single day. And it's not like Israel is perfect. We're proud. You should hear this as an Israeli. We're proud every single day, as I'm proud of you every single day. And I believe it also changed the way Israelis look at themselves. And you know it changed what we call Soviet Jewry.
Right. Really, as you mentioned, instilling back Jewish pride, Jewish strength, Jewish destiny, and self-identity, and really seeing all the prophets' miracles come true. It is just amazing, whether some people are religious or not, but they have to understand this is something bigger than us. And I mean, it's much more. I mean, to say historic is just an understatement.
Yes. Yashikov,
Thank you so much.
It is an honor to have you describe for us this extraordinary event. You represent the state of Israel in a magnificent way. You represent everything that is good and beautiful about the state of Israel. I love you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here to help us share in this 50th celebration of the Six-Day War. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. And thank you, Mark, to you and this beautiful, great American Jewish community, which I believe we are one. Not only one. Not only we share the same common roots, but also the same destiny.
Absolutely. The thoughts of Danny Ayalon, Israel's former ambassador to the United States, former deputy foreign minister, one of those heroic Israelis during the Six-Day War of 1967 who helped work a miracle that changed the Jewish world. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to anything you heard Danny say. Please email me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.